They smiled for the camera, unaware that history would remember them not as performers, but as ghosts. 6 hours after this photograph was taken, every soul in the frame would be dead. Their laughter, applause, and lives buried beneath a fallen tent and a silence that lasted for nearly a century. This photograph was taken at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Saturday in September 1875, somewhere between Manchester and Liverpool. 37 people stood before the camera, frozen in that single moment of time. Some balanced on wooden poles about 5 meters above the ground, while others stood neatly in rows like soldiers, all dressed in their bright show costumes. There were acrobats, strongmen, women who bent their bodies like rubber, dwarfs, giants, and children with painted faces. Behind them, the circus tent rose tall and grand, white and striped against the dull gray sky of Victorian England. At first glance, it looks like just another photo of a traveling circus group, one of many that moved from town to town in that era. But what most people don't know is this. 6 hours after this picture was taken, every single one of those people would be dead. Not one survived. The story of how it happened remains one of the most unsettling and least recorded mysteries of the Victorian period. The name of the circus was Godfrey's Grand Menagerie and Curiosity Show, a bold and popular enterprise that mixed elements of a traditional circus with the strange human exhibitions typical of that time's freak shows. The owner, Silas Godfrey, had built his reputation over 15 years of touring through England, Scotland, and parts of Wales. He was not some cheap fairground trickster. He was a clever businessman who perfectly understood the Victorian love for spectacle, for wonders, for shock, and for anything that challenged the ordinary understanding of the world. The troupe usually had about 40 people, though the exact number changed with temporary hires and replacements. The main acrobats were a family of 6 Polish brothers and sisters who performed daring routines that risked their lives every night. Then there were 3 men known as giants, each standing between 2 meters 20 and 2 meters 40 centimeters tall, a height likely caused by pituitary gigantism. There were also Siamese twins joined at the chest, sold to the troupe by their poor Irish parents when they were still small children. Among the most famous acts was a woman named Constance Fairchild, known as the Elastic Woman. She could twist and fold her body in ways that seemed almost impossible, probably because of some kind of joint hypermobility condition, what we would now call Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, though such medical terms did not exist in 1875. And then there were the children. There were always children in Victorian freak shows, some born into the troupe, others bought, adopted, or stolen, depending on which version of the story you believe. In the old photograph, you can see at least 6 children, appearing to be between 5 and 12 years old. Their faces are strangely similar, expressionless, still, and trained. None of them smile. None fidget like normal children might. They stand perfectly still, their eyes distant and aware that they are being watched, like small creatures raised to perform, not to play. The event that night in September wasn't meant to be anything special. It was just another performance on a long 3-month tour. The troupe had set up their tent in a rented field on the edge of a small industrial town, though history can't quite agree which one. Some records call it Wigan, others Warrington. This uncertainty would later make the investigation harder, leaving the story tangled in confusion. The tent itself was quite large for its time, about 30 meters long and 20 wide. It was supported by a central oak pole almost 15 meters tall, tied with a complex network of steel cables and thick hemp ropes. Around the sides, heavy iron stakes were hammered deep into the ground to hold it firm. This was not a flimsy setup. Silas Godfrey had spent a great deal of money on solid equipment, knowing that his fame depended not just on excitement, but on safety. The weather that day had been unsettled. Records kept by the Royal Meteorological Society show that September 1875 was a stormy month in northwest England. Cold Atlantic air often clashed with warm air from the continent, causing sudden and violent weather changes. That afternoon, while the photo was being taken, the sky was cloudy but calm. There was no rain, no strong wind, just the usual gray, damp air of Victorian England. The show was planned to begin at 8 o'clock in the evening. Tickets had been sold all week through newspaper advertisements and colorful posters pasted in taverns and public squares. Prices depended on where you wanted to sit: 3 pence for the wooden side benches, 6 pence for the front rows, and 1 full shilling for the special seats reserved for wealthier families. For comparison, a factory worker in those days earned between 15 and 20 shillings a week, so attending the circus was a treat, expensive, but still within reach for most families. Based on ticket sales and later reports, it's believed that about 250 to 300 people came that night. Families with children, young workers, and a few middle-class townsfolk all filled the seats, chatting eagerly as they waited for the curtain to rise. The atmosphere was cheerful. Vendors walked through the crowd selling roasted chestnuts, sweet candies, and weak beer. Children laughed and ran between the rows of chairs. Men smoked pipes. It was a night like countless others across industrial England, a brief escape from the smoke, noise, and grind of daily life. But what no one in that tent could know, what no one could even imagine, was that a terrible weakness hid within the very structure above them. Weeks later, investigators would discover the truth. A serious flaw had been growing unnoticed in the tent's central mast. A deep crack, invisible from the outside, ran through the wood about 3 meters above its base. The oak had slowly decayed from inside, eaten away by moisture and time. Though it looked solid, the inner fibers were soft and rotten, creating a hidden fault that waited only for the right pressure to snap. At exactly 8 o'clock, Silas Godfrey stepped into the ring and began the evening's entertainment. His opening speech was part showmanship, part education, a dramatic mixture of excitement and mock science that his Victorian audience adored. He introduced the performers one by one, starting with the acrobats, the most thrilling act designed to catch the crowd's attention right away. The 6 Polish siblings took to the air, swinging from ropes and trapezes high above the audience, their glittering costumes flashing under the gaslights. The crowd gasped and clapped, thrilled by every flip and twist. Everything went exactly as rehearsed. Then came the wonders, the human curiosities. The giants entered first, their enormous frames towering above everyone else. The elastic woman followed, twisting her body in impossible shapes that drew both fascination and discomfort from the onlookers. The Siamese twins came next, silent and solemn, their joined existence turned into a public display. Finally, the children with painted faces were brought forward, each one an act in themselves, their differences paraded before the paying crowd. Every moment followed a careful routine, designed to stir emotions but still appear scientific enough to please the era's sense of propriety. People gasped, whispered, and pointed. Godfrey's show had perfected the delicate balance between amazement and morality, a spectacle that seemed both shocking and respectable. Around 9:45 that evening, the wind outside began to rise. At first, it was only a few quick gusts, enough to make the tent's heavy canvas ripple and flap. The lights flickered slightly, and the air turned colder. A few people looked toward the sides of the tent but quickly turned their eyes back to the stage. Nothing seemed unusual, nothing alarming, nothing worrying. Circus tents were built to endure very strong winds. But what formed outside that night was not a normal wind pattern. Later weather records would identify it as a microburst, a rare event where cold air from a storm plunges downward, hits the ground, and spreads outward with speeds reaching more than 150 kilometers per hour. Surviving witnesses, people who were nearby but not inside the tent, later described how the sky suddenly turned dark. Lightning slashed through the low clouds. The temperature fell sharply within minutes. Then came the wind, not as a growing breeze, but as a solid wall of air moving with incredible power. Inside the tent, the audience at first noticed only a rise in the noise outside. The canvas started to flap harder. The ropes tightened, giving off sharp, high-pitched sounds. Some performers instinctively glanced upward, judging the situation with the practiced eyes of those who spend their lives in fragile, temporary structures. Silas Godfrey, keeping the calm professionalism he was known for, continued his speech, though later accounts said there was a faint tension in his voice. The central mast began to groan. It was a deep, almost inaudible sound, but those standing close could feel the vibration running through the wooden floor. The inner crack, now under enormous sideways pressure from the wind tugging at the upper cables, began to spread. The wood fibers burst apart in tiny, quick snaps, a chain reaction of structural failures growing faster and faster. Then, at exactly 10:03 that night, the mast gave way. It wasn't a clean break. It was a violent, catastrophic collapse where all the stress built up in the cables and frame was released at once. The mast exploded into pieces, sending oak splinters flying like shrapnel in every direction. The steel cables, suddenly freed from their anchors, lashed through the air with deadly speed. The tent's heavy canvas, soaked by the rain now pouring down, fell like a 2-ton wave over everyone inside. What happened in the next few minutes remains partly unclear, pieced together from later evidence and a handful of accounts from those nearby. No one inside the tent lived to tell the story directly. What we know is that the combination of flying wood, whipping cables, falling metal frames, and the crushing weight of the canvas created a disaster within a disaster. People near the exits might have had a brief chance to escape. They may have started toward the openings, but in the sudden darkness, trapped under layers of wet fabric and chaos, those chances vanished instantly. The canvas didn't simply fall on them. It wrapped around them, folded, and created suffocating pockets where air quickly ran out. Outside, the raging wind kept pulling and pushing the wreckage, making any rescue attempt impossible. Locals who rushed toward the fairground described a nightmare scene. The once grand tent had become a heaving mound of black fabric, thrashing in the wind and rain. Muffled screams could be heard, swallowed by the noise of the storm. People outside tried desperately to lift the canvas, to cut openings, to reach those trapped inside, but the sheer weight and twisted wreckage made it useless. With each minute, the cries grew fainter, fewer, until they disappeared altogether. The storm lasted about 40 minutes before it began to weaken. When the winds finally calmed enough for rescuers to work safely, it was already far too late. It took hours to carefully dismantle the collapsed tent, layer by layer, to uncover the bodies beneath. What they found was beyond any nightmare the mind could imagine. In total, 317 people were counted among the dead. Every member of Godfrey's troupe, every spectator who had bought a ticket that evening. No one inside survived. The causes of death varied: head injuries from wooden debris, deep wounds from whipping steel cables, crushed bones from fallen beams, and suffocation beneath the heavy canvas. Many victims suffered more than one fatal wound, making it impossible to say which injury had killed them first. By Victorian standards, the authorities responded quickly. A coroner arrived the following morning. County police set up a perimeter. Telegrams were sent to Manchester and Liverpool asking for help, but the scale of the tragedy overwhelmed the small industrial town. There was no morgue large enough, no supply of coffins sufficient for so many dead, not even enough men to dig 317 separate graves. The solution was grim yet practical. A nearby field was blessed and turned into an emergency burial ground. Large common graves were dug. Bodies were wrapped in sheets when fabric was available, left bare when it wasn't. Officials did their best to record identities, but many faces were too badly disfigured to recognize. Personal items were collected and catalogued. Pocket watches, wedding rings, children's toys, small crosses, trinkets that once held entire lives. Reginald Chamberlain, the coroner in charge of the investigation, wrote a 43-page report that still lies in the National Archives in London. His account was detailed in describing the injuries and precise in explaining the structural collapse, yet strangely cautious in some areas. There were long sections where the language turned vague and uncertain. One appendix, marked confidential, was sealed by court order for 50 years after the disaster. Why such secrecy? What did they wish to hide? The answers appear slowly, scattered across other documents, private letters, suppressed newspaper reports, and notes that escaped official censorship. There were aspects of this tragedy that the Victorian authorities considered deeply troubling, even dangerous to public order. The first question was responsibility. Who could be held legally guilty for 317 deaths? Silas Godfrey was gone, eliminating the most obvious suspect. Investigation showed he had hired local builders to help raise the tent. They too were dead. The wooden mast had come from a supplier in Liverpool who insisted that checking the quality was the buyer's duty. The officials who had approved the performance license said their authority covered only administrative matters, not safety standards. No one wanted to bear the blame. Everyone pointed at someone else. The second issue was the composition of the audience. Among the dead were people from respectable families in the area: a local magistrate and his wife, 2 successful merchants, and the son of a reverend. The presence of such people at a freak show, a type of entertainment that Victorian morals officially labeled as vulgar and improper, created deep social embarrassment. Families did not want to publicly admit that their loved ones had been there. Silence felt safer than confession. Even more troubling was the evidence showing that panic had played a large role in how deadly the disaster became. Analyses of injuries revealed that many victims had not only been crushed by the falling structure, but also by the desperate crowd trying to flee. Piles of bodies were found near the exits, proving that people had been trapped and trampled. Children were crushed underfoot, the elderly knocked down and abandoned. This sudden outbreak of fear and savagery, this total breakdown of civility, shattered the Victorian belief in moral superiority and rational self-control. Reginald Chamberlain wrote a private note that never appeared in his official report. In it, he observed that among the circus performers, several seemed to have died trying to protect others. The strong man had been found curved over 3 children, using his own body to shield them from falling debris. Constance Fairchild was discovered lying over an elderly woman, as if trying to create a space to breathe beneath the wreckage. The Siamese twins were found entangled with a group of people, their arms stretched out as though trying to hold up the collapsing tent. None of this was mentioned publicly. Such stories didn't match the image Victorian society preferred to keep. That freak show performers were moral failures, exploiting their own deformities. Acts of bravery and sacrifice among those labeled less than human didn't fit the official narrative. In the days that followed, the local papers printed short reports. The Manchester Guardian wrote only 3 paragraphs. The Liverpool Mercury offered 5. But soon, the story began to fade. Within 2 weeks, coverage disappeared altogether. Not because the public had lost interest, but because authorities quietly pressured editors to move on. There were whispered fears that too much attention could lead to stricter laws for public shows affecting theaters, music halls, and other circuses. Wealthy business owners wanted the matter forgotten quickly, and Victorian England, with its rigid class system and obedience to authority, easily complied. The families of the victims received little help. Charity funds were set up, collecting modest sums through donations. Some families received $5, others $10, depending on their circumstances and social connections. To an industrial worker, this might represent 2 to 4 months of wages, a helpful amount, but nowhere near enough to cover the loss of a life. Purcell Davenport, one of the acrobats who died that night, left behind a widow and 4 children in London. She received 7 and 6 shillings from the charity fund. That money kept her family alive for about 3 months. After that, she had to send 2 of her children to an orphanage and take a job in a textile mill. Her story was not unusual. It was the common fate of working-class families who lost their main provider in Victorian England. Robert Fairchild, Constance's younger brother, survived only because he had fallen ill that afternoon and stayed behind at a local inn instead of performing. At just 16, he lost his sister, his circus companions, and his way of earning a living. Records show that he tried to continue as a solo performer, but he failed to find steady work. In 1878, his name appeared in the records of a poorhouse in Birmingham. After 1882, he vanished completely from history, most likely dying in poverty and without documentation. The field where the accident happened was abandoned. No new structure was ever built there. No memorial was placed. For decades, it remained an empty patch of land, sometimes used for grazing sheep. Local people avoided it, especially after dark. And as always happens in places touched by tragedy, stories began to grow. People spoke of voices carried by the wind, shapes seen through the mist, strange lights flickering in the night. The usual tales human minds invent to cope with grief that has no proper closure. In 1923, nearly 50 years later, a local businessman decided to build a warehouse on that same ground. When workers began digging the foundation, they uncovered bones, many bones. The mass graves from 1875 had been marked only lightly, and over time the markers were lost under weeds and soil. Work stopped immediately. Archaeologists were called in. The remains were carefully unearthed, catalogued, and moved to a proper cemetery, where a small plaque was placed reading simply, "In memory of those who perished in the circus tragedy, September 1875. The photograph you are now looking at was found in 1967 inside a trunk of old family papers owned by descendants of the photographer. It was discovered alongside glass negatives, financial notes, and everyday letters. No one in the family knew what the photo meant. Only when a local historian studying Victorian entertainment connected the names written in the photographer's notebook to victims of the 1875 tragedy did the truth come to light. This is not just a picture of a circus troupe, it is the final image of 37 people taken 6 hours before their collective death. Every face in the photograph, every stance and expression, belongs to someone who did not know they were living their last day. The woman in the second row, third from the left, was to be married the following week. The tall man in the back had already bought a ticket to sail to America. The child in the front had just begun to learn how to read. All those futures, all those hopes and possible lives were erased in 40 minutes of wind and chaos. The story of the 1875 tragedy stayed hidden, not because there was no evidence, but because it was deliberately buried. It was a wound Victorian society refused to look at, a failure that exposed the darker truth about greed, neglect, and how human worth was measured. It revealed who was mourned and who was quietly forgotten. Freak show performers occupied a strange space in Victorian life. They were both admired and despised, famous yet shunned, fascinating yet mocked. While alive, they drew crowds eager to stare. Once dead, they became statistics, inconveniences to be recorded and then erased. The tragedy made this hypocrisy impossible to ignore, and that embarrassment was exactly what the authorities wanted to avoid. In the Home Office archives, there is a letter dated October 1875 from a Manchester police officer to a superior in London. It reads, "It would be wise to discourage further journalistic investigation. The incident, though unfortunate, involved persons of questionable social standing. Prolonged attention serves only to disturb public peace without bringing any good." The letter was never sent, but its existence shows the mindset of those in charge. This reveals something unsettling about Victorian values. A society that prided itself on progress, civility, and Christianity was also capable of ranking human lives by class and usefulness. Performers in freak shows were seen as less worthy, their deaths requiring less care, less inquiry, and less remembrance. But look again at the photograph. Look closely at the faces. Do not see curiosities or sideshow attractions. See people. See the acrobat who faced his fear of heights every day to make others smile. See the contortionist whose joints ached constantly but who never stopped performing. See the children who played between acts, who had dreams and make-believe friends, who imagined a brighter future. Each of them was a full, complex human being, deserving of dignity. The tragedy of 1875 was not just the collapse of a tent. It was the collapse of a society's morality, a civilization that allowed 317 lives to be forgotten because they belonged to the wrong class. By telling this story, by naming the victims, by remembering them, we perform a small act of justice. When the storm finally ended that September night, and silence fell over the muddy field and the torn tent, something fundamental had shifted. Not in laws, not in safety standards, not even in attitudes. Those would take decades to change. But in the hearts of the locals who heard the screams, who dug the graves, who saw the aftermath, they knew the truth. They understood that beneath the polished image of Victorian pride and morality lay something fragile. A civilization that could collapse just as suddenly as any circus tent. If this story unsettles you, if it makes you question how societies decide whose lives matter and whose don't, that discomfort is meaningful. It means your conscience is awake. If you wish to uncover more forgotten tales from the Victorian age, stories of lives erased and memories silenced, subscribe to this channel. Many more photographs wait in the shadows, each one holding the memory of someone who deserves to be remembered, each one a voice refusing to be silenced.